Welcome to Leading Change Without Being Oblivious to Resistance. I'm Michelle Miller, the founder and CEO at M3 Ultimate Solutions. We're actually a management consulting and staffing firm that brings IT and organizational change together. We're going to cover what is resistance. We have to understand what we're dealing with and why people behave the way they do. So basically, they're refusing to accept or comply with anything brand new or different. They make an effort, and basically the effort, they go outside to make sure that they're going to stop this change and they're going to fight against it. They basically prevent something from having an impact or an effect. They attempt to prevent something by an action or argument. So we're going to cover what the different types of behaviors are later in this presentation of what we mean by argument and opposition. So what causes resistance? Basically, is a disruption of the current state. So in this disruption, it could be a culture change. A company is reorganizing and the alignment people don't agree with. They don't agree with maybe where their department's reporting or who they're reporting to. Different technology changes. Maybe the technology is going to increase their workload. We hope not, but sometimes it could happen. Maybe it's a new technology that people are afraid of, and they're not going to be as proficient as they are in the current state. Shifts in operations, doing things differently because it's more efficient or because the market requires to be more ahead of the competitors, so you have to turn things around faster. The speed of change, it could be slow or it could be super fast. And of course, limited resources in your organization. You're doing more for less, more likely, and additional resources are not going to be perfect. So why do people resist change? Well, the emotional side of the brain tends to create the anxiety. They have this anxiety, they have the fear towards this change, and that's control, like they're losing control over something that they're responsible for. Culturally, it could be internationally, in a country or in an organization. There are different ethnic backgrounds as far as policies, practices, and values. Communications, whether it's internal or external, could be insufficient, unclear, unprepared, so they're going to resist because they don't understand what's being communicated to them, and it's creating confusion. Improvements, it could be increasing productivity and efficiency that requires them to be more adaptable, and they disagree with maybe that particular technique that's being done, or the understanding of what it means to be more productive and efficient. Training internally is basically applying the knowledge that they're receiving to be more efficient, the benefits that they're going to get from the training, and the increased knowledge that they will attain. So what are the resistant behaviors that we contend with? Passive resistance is basically a person who is expressing negative feelings or opinions. The behaviors are basically agreeing verbally, they fake support, and they withhold information. Symptoms, they're uncooperative, they're non-compliant. Active resistance, openly expressing feelings and opinions. These people are easier to detect than passive resistance because they will tell you straight up front and be very direct about verbalizing their opposition and striking out and shutting people down. I've been in a situation in a meeting where I've seen this behavior happen. It is not good to see people shutting people down, don't let them talk, and actually get their thoughts out. The symptoms, they're going to find fault, they're ridiculing, they're defensive, and they're fearful and unempathetic. Aggressive resistance is blocking change. These people, they tend to be called blockers, and their behaviors are undermining, sabotaging, and destroying the validity of the change. They will ruin credibility as well. Their symptoms are deviant, manipulative, and hostile. So you can detect those people right up front. Hopefully you're not thinking that they're having a bad day, because typically this is just how they are behaviorally speaking. Passive-aggressive resistance is a failure to express their needs and wants and feelings. So they're a bit more challenging to try to detect those behaviors because they can't express them. So non-verbally, when we try to look at people's behaviors, we're looking for certain cues, and we may not see those non-verbal behaviors. They're negative, they're angry, resentful. The symptoms are destructive, protesting, and they procrastinate and complain all the time. So they will definitely, you'll hear them complain, but they won't tell you what they're after or what they want. So what are the impacts and interventions of these behaviors? So I'm going to cover the impacts, but I'm not going to cover every single intervention that's listed. Plus, of what's listed, there are other interventions that you can deploy to try to handle these situations. For passive, you'll have to spend additional effort and time in building trust, educating, convincing, and coaching people along. This takes time. This does not happen overnight. And it's basically trying to sell them on the change. Active, the impacts are lower team morale, decreased efficiency, disruptive work environment, no teamwork. So if you were striving for a collaborative team or a high-performance team, these people will definitely impact your goal of having a high-performance team. Aggressive, they are toxic, chaotic work environments, constantly fighting, arguing, and defensiveness. So this is a lot of drama to the workplace when we're paying people to actually get work done versus creating this drama. These resistors tend to be constantly fighting and arguing, so you'll be able to detect those right away. Passive-aggressive resistors, they decrease team unity, productivity, while increasing frustration and stress. It's very high maintenance for the work environment for people that want to get the work done, and they come home stressful because of these passive-aggressive resistors in the workplace. There are stages of resistance towards change. There's prevention. How can we make sure that we reduce the resistance down? So in our line of work of organizational change, we make a compelling case for the why. 90% of the time, it's because people don't understand why we're changing or why we're doing X, Y, and Z. We ensure that our leadership of the change is active and visible in obtaining executive support, because they will be our cheerleaders and champions for the change, especially in an organization where the culture is empowered. People can escalate up the ladder to executives if they disagree with a change. So we want to make sure we try to prevent that by letting them know the why and when and et cetera. And provide opportunities for involvement. So for having workshops or think tanks, meetings, they can express their thoughts and feel like they're being heard. Proactive, this is where we're asking, where's this resistance coming from? If we know where it's coming from, we can head it off at the path. If we know what it looks like, which is what we just reviewed, then we know what we're looking for. What are the causes that's creating this resistance? And what can we do to actually address this? So we can be a proactive and we can be preventative. If you're on the reactive, it's basically taking the scenario of what happened and diagnosing the root cause and addressing the root cause, as well as enable leadership to help deal with the resistance after we have diagnosed. You kind of want to not be reactive because it takes more time and effort to actually resolve it. But of course, we have those resistors that are hard to detect in the workplace, so we want to make sure we're not oblivious to those behaviors. So the cost of resistance, the behavior cost equation, I've been challenged in the past that you can't measure the cost of soft behaviors or resistance. And I have the equation here, so you can take a number of hours per week, like if they're behaving this way, 10 hours a week, maybe a couple hours here in a meeting or a couple hours there, speaking to somebody, basically you can take those hours per week times $100 per hour if it's average hourly labor cost. The duration, we have 50 weeks versus 52 because of vacations and et cetera. And then quantity of people. So we took about 12% of a 60,000 plus organization, and we come up with around 12,000 people. So if you take all that and compile it together, you'll come up with $600 million a year, roughly, that these behaviors are costing an organization of a major size. And you think, what can we do with $600 million? Well, we can actually fund some other projects. We could put some other programs together. And we're not saying that people need to be robots. What we're saying basically is once a decision's been made, educate everyone and bring them along for the change without resisting. So we want to be effective with that, as well as realizing the impacts of resistance and additional costs that are on top of this equation, declines in productivity, how you actually measure that, especially if you're in manufacturing. You can measure it of what the declines are in the productivity. So that's an additional cost. Loss of productive employees when you have your turnover and you can't get as much done because maybe they do the work of 3 people. And more increasing employee dissatisfaction and motivation. So that ties as a counteraction, tying with productive employees, aptism, and everything else that goes with it. There's a lot more that you can measure outside of the $600 million. There's also a resource here by John Carter. He is an expert in organizational change. He talks about the role of leadership is crucial in reducing resistance. You can click on the hyperlink here for the video to watch his message in reducing resistance. We do have some resistance management exercises. These exercises actually, or I should say these scenarios have actually happened in the workplace. So even though I withhold the company and people's names to make sure I protect everyone, they actually happen. So when you go through the scenario, we're going to transition over. So you can see the exercises in a better view here. So if we look at there we go, blow it up a little bit more for you. So if we look at resistance management exercises at the manager level, so for instance, assessing the work environment project. Our instructions here are identify resistant behaviors and fill in the blank. And then identify the leader who is oblivious to resistance. And then we have some characters here. Can you identify a resistor? In this particular scenario, we have Miss Clueless, who is an IT manager. We have Miss Mediate, who's a project lead. We have Miss Abrasive, a communication analyst. We have Mr. Law, a statistical analyst. And we have Miss Miracle, who's an external organizational change management consultant. So basically when we walk through this particular scenario, Miss Miracle is designing a work environment survey. So she's the OCM external consultant. And Miss Mediate is working on fun ideas for the communication candy campaign. Miss Abrasive disagrees with the work environment survey. So you would want to plug and play. What type of behavior is this? If you need to go back to when you're looking at this on your own, you go back to slide number 5, what the resistant behaviors are, and you can look at what is being described to correlate it back. So if she disagrees, for instance, disagreeing with the work environment survey. So which type of behavior would be appropriate on disagreement? Oops. And she's communicating at the same time. So she's being very active. She's, more or less, she's not like super aggressive, but she's just expressing and verbalizing opposition. So basically that's what's happening here. Ms. Clueless says that the team needs to work with Ms. Abrasive on communication. So who is oblivious in this scenario to the behavior? Of course, you can write in Ms. Clueless because that's the character in this scenario. The team asks about internal methods for communication. Ms. Abrasive verbalizes opposition. Again, what type of behavior is going on in this particular team environment? So we have Ms. Abrasive verbalizing opposition. She's being more aggressive, so you'd want to write in aggressive resistance for that behavior. She's verbalizing. It's one thing to be active and then going into more aggressive. Ms. Abrasive is uncooperative and withholds information. If you remember on the behaviors back here, now she just went into passive. So it's more than like someone having bipolar disorder that is like one behavior or the other. This behavior actually happened 3 different ways. She went active, aggressive, and then passive. Let's see if you can do the next exercises on your own and then plug and play what you're seeing here. That was an example. So on scenario number 2, data collection, monitoring the work environment survey. We still have the same characters here, but basically Ms. Miracle works with Mr. Laude to gauge survey response rate. Ms. Abrasive sabotages the data and sends an email to Ms. Miracle about the specific survey comments from the system. Ms. Miracle escalates the importance of the individuals not touching a live survey to Ms. Clueless. Ms. Clueless doesn't understand why. There's that why. It's an issue for Ms. Abrasive to review comments. Mr. Lowell finds out that Ms. Abrasive clicked on a button that eliminated receiving data for survey results. Ms. Clueless confronts Ms. Abrasive about the missing data. Ms. Abrasive defensively denies the action. So doing that particular scenario on your own, you're going to see a lot of different types of resistant behaviors that are embedded in what we went over. I'm not going to go through scenario number 3. Again, you can work on your own. It's basically an extension of the behaviors in the workplace, but this is a different topic. The other scenario, so that was at the manager level. And then we have another scenario which happens, exercise that happens at the C-suite level. So if you're looking for those scenarios as far as C-suite, they happen a little differently. And when we talked early on about the emotional part of the brain, see if I can blow that up for you as well. So the different parts of the brain that create more emotions, we find it actually at the higher executive levels. And I'm not real sure why at this stage, but basically they're happening. So if we look at scenario number 1, we have observing operations and reviewing files. And then we still have our characters, but they're different characters. You have a CEO, CFO, VP, plant manager, operations consultant, operations trainer, and of course, Ms. Miracle, the external OCM consultant. So what you're going to see here is difference. We'll step through this one, and then you can work on your own on the other scenarios. But Mr. Dazzle is observing plant operations in at a location in Latin America. Mr. Earthquake reviews the employee files to identify the trainers. Mr. Dazzle has a meeting with Mr. Angle, Mr. Jazz, to discuss observations and training. Mr. Jazz yells in anger at Mr. Earthquake for reviewing the files. Mr. Jazz is meeting with Mr. Angle and Mr. Dazzle about the files being reviewed. Mr. Angle doesn't understand why reviewing files is a problem. It's all innocent at this point, right? But something is going on to create the emotional changes of why people are just basically resisting of what's happening. We don't know the whole story behind this, but we do know that there's emotional behaviors with this resistance and what kind of behaviors that you're going back to what you learned today. And you can plug and play who's oblivious and those type of behaviors. I hope that you really enjoyed this session because it's very important that we work on reducing the resistance in the workplace. Thank you.